He was born in Indiana in 1962. He was a twin, and I know the show talks about having a brother. It was actually an identical twin named Gary. But Larry was very different. If I know in the show they didn't look alike. They do look a lot alike, but Larry was not really healthy when he was born. He had some learning disabilities, and they really said that Gary took most of the resources while they were in the womb. And I don't want to make light of this, but this reminds me a lot of that movie Twins with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito, where they have one really good twin and then the other is Danny DeVito. Larry Hall is the Danny DeVito of this set of twins.
Like literally, like the one guy is such a good looking guy and very, very much, smart and intelligent. This other guy is just a complete, very strange, wacky character. Not good looking, shall we say.
No, he was kind of everything that was left over in the gene pool, it seems like. Speech impediment. And even with the speech impediment when he was a kid, the way that Paul portrayed him talking was just so eerie.
He uses a really high voice and talks like that all the time. It was really creepy.
I don't know how the guy was able to do that and just like have a voice afterwards. Like he did a really good job portraying that role.
He really did.
As we end up saying with most killers, he had a rough childhood. No surprise there. He was often bullied because of his speech impediment, because he wasn't smart, because he wasn't like the other kids. He didn't have the emotional capacity to either relate to them and make friends or to deal with the consequences of not having friends. So a rough start. I feel like we have to say that every time, but it's very common in all the killers. Not a great childhood.
So let's talk about his dad for a little bit. His dad was a caretaker of a cemetery. And in fact, the family lived pretty much right beside the cemetery. So the family could kind of take care of it. And his dad was like a grave digger. And, again and again, we see this for serial killers. At some point in their childhood, there's a fascination with death and around death. And we just kind of wonder, is this where Larry started with his dad being a caretaker of a cemetery? And while this is completely a different situation with Hall, he lived a life where he was constantly surrounded by death because of this role. And around 12 years old, he got involved himself. His dad would make him dig graves, and that's portrayed in the role or in the series as well. So Larry had a low IQ. He was subjected to bullying, and if you watch the film, it makes a lot of sense. And he was repeatedly abused by his dad, who was also an alcoholic. And, he was staring death in the face almost constantly because of where he lived. And, when you combine all those things together, it's a formula that ends in disaster.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. We were talking before we started recording. I don't know what it would be like to grow up. Like, cemeteries creep me out when I go to funerals or when I drive by. I can't imagine.
Right.
I guess you get desensitized with seeing it, but that's such an eerie place to grow up.
Well, especially when your dad, like you said, he's a grave digger. I mean, that's, we're all products of our environment, and like you said, like, okay, so my dad played pro hockey. So as a result, I have a proclivity of being a hockey fan. I collected the cards and I watched the games and, everything hockey. So don't tell me that his dad is a grave digger and you're not thinking about graves, or he's talking about this grave he had to dig at work. And as a child, you're probably like, it's a pretty, you probably come to terms with the finality of life pretty quickly. And most kids should probably not be exposed to that sort of thinking when you're not even a teenager yet.
Yeah. And I think that, and he was made to dig the graves as well at 12 years old. Like, I think about a 13-year-old. First off, I don't think he could dig a very big hole.
Yeah.
but also he was being physically abused and his dad was a drunk. So I don't know. I wonder if when he's digging those holes, if he ever thought about putting his dad in one, because he was just an awful life.
I feel like
I'm sorry to interrupt. Also too, like, it seems that you would understand just how fleeting life is, and probably heard a lot of stories about people who, died in accidents or got killed. It probably desensitizes you to death, and we're going to be talking about this, but in Blackbird, the series, he's very desensitized. Like, there's no problem with killing somebody. Like, what's the difference? We're all going to end up in the grave anyways. Like, who knows what he's really thinking as he's digging these graves at 12 years old.
Yeah, most of us learn about that from losing a pet or a grandparent, and here it is a part of his everyday life. And like John said, there are a lot of scenes in Blackbird about Larry digging graves with his dad, but it also shows him robbing graves.
Well,
And
yeah.
I tried my best in my research to find evidence of that. And while it certainly seems to fit the narrative of everything going on in his life, of who his dad was and who he became, there seems to be no evidence that that actually took place. It was never brought up in any kind of legal proceedings, and that's not as easy to nail down as some of the other things that we do know he did. But I wouldn't be shocked if they were doing that. We do know that his dad was fired from his job while Larry was a teenager, and part of that was he was putting the bodies in the wrong grave sites.
Wow.
I guess if you're like putting the stones up, you're digging the graves, and you're drunk, that at some point you're going to misplace a body, which is horribly unfortunate. Not only him losing his job and his son seeing that, but families, this is a huge part of families coming together is around death, of where are we going to go to this funeral? We're going to decorate the grave and that kind of thing. So much going on there. Around the age of 15, that's when we see him start getting in legal trouble. Early on, he and his brother were doing, I don't know, kind of in some parts, regular teenage stuff. They were running around town and they would break some windows, did a little bit of vandalism. But Larry also started some fires and committed some robberies. Now, we've, I think, discussed this before, but there's this idea of the McDonald triad, these behaviors as a youngster that most serial killers have. And those three things are arson, bedwetting beyond a reasonable age, and animal abuse. We don't have any records of animal abuse, but we do know that Larry set things on fire, and there are reports of the bedwetting piece. So that's one of those, it's those indications start adding up over the course of time.